Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1 I call Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the reported prevalence and trend of crimes committed where the perpetrator was wearing a disguise, particularly in relation to antisocial behaviour.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The wearing of disguises is not a new phenomenon, and it is a matter for Police Scotland to take account as part of its operational response. Any recorded instances as a proportion of reported crime are very small. Police Scotland use a range of powers to prevent and tackle antisocial and criminal behaviour. In certain circumstances, this can include stop and search and the removal of head and face coverings. A code of practice exists to ensure this is done in a manner that is lawful, proportionate and accountable.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and I think we have all become all too aware of instances and situations of people wearing balaclavas in order to facilitate crime, whether that's riding illegal electric motorcycles to antisocial behaviour, and it is definitely a component in the increasing levels of violence against shop workers, and indeed these issues have been rehearsed in the Chamber. But it's a frustration for the police because the simple act of wearing a balaclava to conceal one's identity, to facilitate a crime, is not a crime in and of itself. Indeed, other countries, this is a crime. In England and Wales, certain US states, in France and in Queensland and Australia, to use a disguise with an intent to commit crime is an offence. So I think it stands to reason, if you conceal your face in order to facilitate crime, the police should have the ability to stop you, and that should be a crime. Does the Minister agree with that, and will the Government review the legal situation?
Minister.
Thank you. So I do know that Police Scotland do have at the moment, as I said in my earlier, the stop and search powers. They've also got the Section 60 powers, where Police Scotland, where it's appropriate and necessary, have powers available under Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994, which allows searches to be carried out in particular locality for a specific period of time, and they can ask for the removal of face masks as well. This is an important issue, and I am happy to meet with the member to discuss this further.
Ben McPherson.
Thank you. There has reportedly been an uptake in the utilisation of these disguises in some crime and antisocial behaviour here in the capital, and these trends are partly developing through social media. Therefore, what recent discussions has the Scottish Government had with their counterparts in the UK Government about the responsibility of social media platforms to prevent the spread of harmful content that promotes copycat crimes and antisocial behaviour, often involving face coverings?
Minister.
Thank you. The member's quite right to refer to the influence of social media and the impact it can have. Although regulation of the internet is reserved to the UK government, we have been engaging extensively with UK ministers on the Online Safety Act to strengthen protections for young people. We responded to Ofcom's consultation on illegal harms online last year, which influenced its codes and guidance in relation to duties for online providers to protect users from harm, including threats, abuse and hate offences. We are continuing to engage with Ofcom and the UK government to understand the impact and effectiveness of these actions, and I'm happy to keep the member updated.
Thank you. Question number 2, Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I declare an interest before asking this question as somebody who holds a PVG certificate? To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the Protecting Vulnerable Groups scheme, including the most recent data for the number of registered persons with PVG certification.
Minister Natalie Donennis.
On Tuesday, the 1st of April, it became a legal requirement for anyone carrying out a regulated role to be a member of the PVG scheme. There are currently 1,693,115 PVG scheme members. After a person joins the PVG scheme, Disclosure Scotland continuously monitor them to ensure that they have not become unsuitable to carry out a regulated role.
Liz Smith.
Thank you, Minister, for that, and I think it's good to see that the law has been tightened up in this regard. May I ask, however, as I wasn't able to establish this through my own research or that of a constituent, whether the change to the law also includes changes to the criteria for the designation of qualifying voluntary organisations who are not required to pay the £59 fee for their employees?
Minister.
So the two main areas that are going to require additional PVG checks as a result of the legal requirement or the move to regulated roles are in the health sector and the voluntary sector, and the additional roles in the voluntary sector come from a greater emphasis in the Disclosure Act on the role of power and influence over children and protected adults in determining if an individual is in a regulated role. On the specific question in relation to the fee, I'd be more than happy to update Ms Smith on that following the questions.
Thank you. Question number 3, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I remind members of my voluntary register of trade union interests to ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on staffing at ScotRail ticket offices.
Mr Jim Fairley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. ScotRail has this week commenced to operate its ticket offices in accordance with the revised opening hours, which reflect the changing preferences of ScotRail's customers, and I am pleased to confirm that no jobs or working hours have been lost. ScotRail has assessed the requirement for staff, which allows it to adhere to the revised opening times, and currently carries out recruitment for ticket office staff where necessary.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Minister for that reply? But under this government's stewardship, peak fares have returned to Scotland's railways. This week, all fares increased by 3.8%, and on Monday of this week, 2,800 hours were cut from staffing at ticket offices across Scotland. All of these measures, approved by the Scottish Government, all diminish passenger service, passenger safety and passenger accessibility, all make the jobs of railway workers more difficult. So will the Government think again, take the bold action required and reverse these decisions?
Minister.
While ScotRail ticket offices' opening hours have remained unchanged over the last 3 decades, ticket office sales have reduced from 78 to 14% over that period. And ScotRail Holdings and ScotRail have rightly reviewed that to ensure that they are delivering services that meet the customer expectations. And the adjustments to the ticket office opening hours which were implemented will enable ScotRail staff to be redeployed to focus more directly on supporting passengers. So that kind of touches on some of the areas where the member's talking about accessibility for disability. It will enable better assistance for passengers while staff are being more visible to help deter antisocial behaviour and reduce fare evasion.
Brief supplementary, Mark Roskell.
Women, particularly disabled women, experience sexual assault and harassment on public transport and have expressed concern about being less safe in unstaffed stations. So what actions does the Government intend to take to guarantee women's safety, particularly at the growing number of unstaffed stations that we have, Minister?
Minister.
ScotRail undertook research and they carefully considered when tickets were being purchased and passenger assistance was required to ensure that stations would be staffed when those travelling needed it. As ticket offices are not closing, it will result in passengers still being able to get assistance from staff. However, out with of those times. ScotRail has also given assurances that tickets can still be purchased on the train, including discounted fares. And these are important improvements which we all want to see in the public services for a public-run railway service.
Question number 4, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will accelerate the full implementation of bus franchising powers in the Transport Scotland Act of 2019.
Minister Jim Fairley.
All local transport authorities in Scotland now have the power to start developing their franchising proposals, and we will bring forward one further set of regulations later this spring, and that will focus on the process of transitioning from the current commercial market into a franchise, as well as transitioning out of a franchise. At the same time, officials are developing guidance for local transport authorities on the franchising process. This will cover the preparation of a franchising framework, the audit process, what an authority should expect when going through the franchising approval process, and the process for commencing a franchise.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And those provisions are more than welcome, because this week bus fares in Glasgow have gone up to £5.90 for an adult day ticket, while a single has risen to £3.10. For too long, Glaswegians have paid the highest bus fares of any British city for an unreliable and fragmented service, while Manchester, Liverpool and Leeds are powering ahead with bus franchising. It's a huge opportunity for Greater Glasgow to take back control of its bus system. The next Transport Commissioner for Scotland will convene the panel that will decide whether SPT can establish that bus franchise. So does the Minister agree that the next Commissioner must not stand in the way of bus franchising, which is overwhelming democratic political support, and will he ensure that the RTP SPT is fully resourced for that purpose?
Minister.
I couldn't agree more with Paul Sweeney. This is an absolutely fantastic opportunity for RTPs and other organisations to want to take control of the public service provision of buses, and I absolutely accept that point. We have been quite clear from day one that what we want to do is give the local authorities and the transport authorities the ability to be able to make that transition to franchising, and I think the provisions we put in place do exactly that.
Question number 5, Douglas Lumsden.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on when it will publish its energy strategy and just transition plan.
Minister Alistair Allen.
The judgments and issues in the energy strategy and just transition plan are informed and influenced by a range of recent developments in the UK Government's energy policy and indeed by court decisions. This, therefore, remains a rapidly changing landscape, which includes UK Government consultation on future oil and gas policy being open for stakeholder input over the coming months. We are taking time to reflect on these ongoing developments before drawing any conclusions and publishing any final strategy.
Presiding Officer, this is becoming a joke. I have asked about the energy strategy 16 times in the last year, because businesses want to know if investment will be welcomed here or not. Offshore Energy UK said last week that another 7 billion barrels of oil could be extracted from the North Sea, and that half of the oil and gas the UK needs before 2050 could be produced domestically. In an increasingly unstable world, does the Minister recognise that it's common sense to make use of our own domestic supply of oil and gas rather than importing it from abroad? And does he also recognise the damage being caused by the SNP's presumption against new oil and gas? And will he ditch it today and finally confirm when his party's long overdue energy strategy will finally be published?
Minister.
The member will obviously be aware that the decision will ultimately be made by the UK Government, but we are clear in our support for a just transition for Scotland's oil and gas sector, which recognises the maturity of the North Sea basin and is in line with our climate change commitments. So offshore oil and gas licensing, as well as the consenting and associated fiscal regime, all of these things that go with it, I don't know why the member is shouting, because they are all matters that are currently reserved to the UK Government. Any further extraction and use of fossil fuels must be consistent with climate obligations and just transition commitments. And it's vital that we take an evidence-based approach to the energy transition. That is why we have consistently called on the UK Government to approach decisions for North Sea oil and gas projects on a rigorously evidence-led, case-by-case basis, with both climate compatibility and energy security key considerations.
Question number 6, Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact of the reported rising childcare costs on families, particularly those on low and middle incomes, in light of recent research by the Coram Family and Childcare Charity.
Minister.
Supporting families through access to high-quality, affordable and accessible childcare is critical to the First Minister's mission of eradicating child poverty. That's why, since 2021, we've prioritised investment of £1 billion per year in funded ELC for all 3- and 4-year-olds and those 2-year-olds who need it most. Our interim ELC 1140 evaluation report, published in August 24, found that uptake of funded hours is high, and there are promising signs that the expansion is delivering improvements in quality, flexibility, accessibility and affordability. Our full evaluation report will be published later this year.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for that answer. And while the cost for a part-time nursery place for an under 2 now costs an average of £70.51 per week in England after working parent entitlements, that is 56% decrease since last year. In Scotland, a part-time nursery place for a child under 2 costs an average of £122.38. a 7% rise on 2024. This will clearly hit the lowest paid workers hardest, with many families having to pay £50 or more a week for the same childcare in Scotland that they would get in England. What will the Scottish Government do to address this inequality?
Minister.
I think Mr Whitfield raises an important point, but I would point out Scotland is the only part of the UK to already offer 1140 hours a year of funded ELC to all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. And our investment is fundamental to giving children the best start in life. Now, in contrast, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has also made clear that the poorest third of families in England will see almost no direct benefit from the UK Government childcare entitlements. Let me be clear, this is about what is best for Scotland's children. Our offer is built for the children who need it most. That being said, we are continuing to work with local authorities, continuing to work with stakeholders to see how we can support parents more. The member is aware of all the work that we're doing in relation to our early adopter communities and other aspects of our childcare offer, and I will continue to look for ways that we can support parents with their childcare costs.
Brief supplementary, Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The value of good quality, accessible and affordable childcare is essential to addressing child poverty and enabling parents to re-enter the workforce. And thanks to the policies of the previous Conservative government, as already been stated, the cost of part-time childcare place was more than halved, and the cost of a full-time place was reduced by 20%. Now, I've been highlighting in this place the issues around early years childcare for working parents for some time. So will the Minister agree to examine the implementation of 1140 hours of free childcare and adjust the policy to ensure that parents can actually get back to employment?
Minister.
I mean, Ms McCall talks about UK Conservative government policy in relation to childcare. I would seriously call into question the impact that Conservative policies had on families across Scotland for a number of years. Now, I would say, as I pointed out in my previous response, this is about helping the children. For children aged under 3, the picture is different. You know, it's guaranteed that ELC, if our 1140 offer, will benefit 3- and 4-year-olds, but for children aged under 3, the picture is a little bit different. And how much they benefit from ELC is determined by crucial factors such as their family background, what age they start in ELC, the quality of services and the balance of hours they spend between care at home and in ELC settings. Now, we do have a number of work streams underway in terms of increasing access for parents, but I would emphasise that we want to get this right for our youngest children and we want to get it right for families, and that is what we are working towards.
Question number 7, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the potential impact of the UK Government's spring statement on the Scottish budget.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
As I set out to Parliament yesterday, the Chancellor has caused a great deal of concern across Scotland by her decision in the UK Spring Statement to shortchange public services and deliver cuts to some of the most vulnerable in our society. I called on the UK Government to reject the failed approach of austerity, but while they may deny it, for many people this looks and feels like austerity. We are considering the impacts on Scotland's public finances, and I will set out more detail in the medium-term financial strategy at the end of May.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With organisations saying that by 2030 the poorest 10% will get poorer and the richest 10% will get richer, what analysis has the Scottish Government conducted on the increase in inequality within Scotland as a result of the Labour Government Spring Statement, which takes from the poor while protecting the rich? And is it now not apparent that the only way to create a fairer Scotland is independence?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Kevin Stewart is absolutely right, and we are considering the impact of the UK Government's planned cuts to welfare policies on Scotland. What is clear from the UK Government's own impact assessment is that 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, will be pushed into relative poverty in 2029-30. This is likely to increase inequality and is shameful. As I said to Parliament yesterday, we will strain every sinew to protect disabled people from this deplorable action of the UK Government, and we're committed, of course, to eliminating child poverty, but this job is being made harder by the actions of the UK Government.
Thank you. A concise question number 8, Michael Mara.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to ensure adequate provision of teaching staff in secondary schools in Dundee.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
The Scottish Government has provided local authorities with increased funding of £186.5 million this year as part of our agreement with local government to restore teacher numbers to 2023 levels. There is an additional £28 million of funding contained in the budget to provide for additional support for learning, which can be used flexibly by our councils to invest in further extra teachers in secondary schools, including in Dundee. The overall number of teachers in Scotland's classrooms has increased by more than 2,500 over the past decade as a result of direct Scottish and Government investment.
Michael Mara.
The head teacher of St John's High School in Dundee has written to parents saying S1 and S2 pupils will receive fewer maths lessons per week, and National 5 application of maths classes will only see a qualified maths teacher on a rotational basis. Responsibility for this mess lies with the SNP government that slashed council budgets, presided over a decline in Scottish education and piled ever more responsibilities on our teachers. In his letter, head teacher Sean Haggany apologises for the disruption to learning. Cabinet Secretary, will you join him and apologise?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Mr Mara highlights an issue which I note has received press coverage in today's Courier. I have asked my officials to engage substantively with Dundee City Council, and I remind Mr Mara of local authorities' statutory responsibilities with regard to the delivery of education. But as I intimated in my original response, Dundee City Council will receive an extra £5.1 million as a result of this government's investment through the budget, which will help the City Council to increase teacher numbers, alleviating the challenges that he rightly raises today. And it is thanks to that investment from the Scottish Government that we have the highest paid classroom teachers, the lowest pupil-teacher ratio and the highest school spending per pupil on all of these measures across these islands. But it remains deeply politically incoherent that Mr Mara and his party voted to abstain on further investment in Scotland's classrooms, where we know and agree it is needed
Thank you,
most.
Cabinet Secretary. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland exports around £4 billion worth of goods to the United States each year, and it's our largest export destination. Donald Trump's tariffs will cause significant harm to many of our industries, including food and drink, textiles, engineering and pharmaceuticals. So will the First Minister instruct the Government and its business agencies to do whatever they can to support businesses and to protect Scottish jobs?
Minister.
That is absolutely what the Scottish Government and our enterprise agencies are doing. That's what we do on all occasions, to work with the business community to strengthen the economic prospects and opportunities for Scotland. The imposition of tariffs is not good news. It will be damaging for economic activity, not just in Scotland, the United Kingdom, but across the world. And there will also be negative implications for the population of the United States with what was applied yesterday. So we will, of course, engage with the United Kingdom Government, who carry the responsibility for international trade as part of the constitutional settlement. We have been doing so for some time. We will continue to do so as part of our efforts to promote and to protect Scottish business.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. The Scottish Chambers of Commerce say that many of our firms will now struggle to survive and the US is the largest overseas market for Scotch whisky, worth almost £1 billion in annual sales. And when US tariffs on Scotch were introduced 6 years ago, they cost the industry £600 million in lost sales. And deploying some diplomatic understatement, the Scotch Whisky Association says that it is disappointed at the new tariffs. Help is needed. These tariffs follow an increase in whisky duty imposed by the UK Government 6 months ago. So will the Scottish Government back my call for the UK Labour Government to lower its record-high tax on whisky?
First Minister.
Well, the United Kingdom Government will make its financial decisions. Mr Finlay is well able to make his representations to the United Kingdom Government. I noticed that, of course, when the Conservative Government was in power, they weren't shy at putting tax onto Scotch whisky into the bargain. So it's nice to know that Mr Finlay has had a conversion on the road to Damascus on that particular question. There are, of course, very significant issues that affect the Scotch whisky industry. That's why the Government has had extensive dialogue with the Scotch Whisky Association. It's why I will be engaging with the Scotch Whisky Association when I'm in the United States over the course of the next few days as part of the marking of Tartan Week. And I can assure Mr Finlay that this Government will leave no stone unturned in ensuring that we take forward the concerns of the industry, working with the United Kingdom Government and the industry to protect the prospects for an industry that contributes very significantly to the economic well-being of Scotland.
Russell Finlay.
Well, when I speak with the Scotch whisky industry, it's this Government they tell me that they are worried about. We need to maximise the opportunities for Scottish businesses to sell their products abroad, which helps grow our economy and to fund public services. Last year, the Scottish Government announced a USA export plan to identify the best opportunities for Scottish businesses. But within months, they cancelled it. We called that short-sighted at the time. So was that a mistake? And ahead of his trip to Tartan Week in New York, will John Sweeney reverse that decision and produce a new USA export plan?
First Minister.
I find this line of questioning really very odd from a party that wants the Scottish Government to scale back all of our international representation.
First Minister, Mr Ross, please adhere to our standing orders. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I find this line of questioning absolutely bizarre, because the Conservatives are the ones that demand that the Government close our international offices that are absolutely critical to the representation of Scotland abroad and the economic success of our country. So I'm really proud of what Scottish Trade International does on our behalf, and I know that the export strategies of the Scottish Government are focused on the needs of the industry. So I can assure Mr Finlay that in all the Scottish Government does, we will take forward the interests of Scottish industry, we will look at the opportunities to promote our products overseas, and we will stand shoulder to shoulder with the Scottish industry as we promote our important products to overseas markets.
Russell Finlay.
So no answer to that question then. The new Trump tariffs will put Scottish jobs at risk. They'll stop businesses from growing and they will slow economic growth. Now, John Sweeney can't stop the tariffs, but he can lower bills here in Scotland. This week, Scottish families faced more tax rises due to the SNP and Labour. Our analysis shows that an average person's bill will rise by around £1,000 due to higher income tax, national insurance, energy costs, train fares, water bills and council tax. The cost of tariffs surely makes it vital for John Sweeney to look at lowering the burden on hard-working Scots and businesses. So will he?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the budget that the Scottish Government has successfully put to Parliament and which is now going to be implemented involves over £700 million of business rate reductions for companies within Scotland. That's just one of the pro-business measures in the Scottish Government's budget. There is also the investment that we make in the enterprise agencies and in our representation overseas, which of course the Conservatives are opposed to. And Mr Finlay makes his call for there to be business tax reductions, but he also made a call in the budget for there to be income tax reductions, which would reduce public expenditure by £1 billion, which would undermine the investment we are making in the economy. Now, what I can say to Mr Finlay to reassure him is that the Scottish Government has taken forward an economic agenda that has seen GDP per person in Scotland grow by 10.3% compared to 6% in the United Kingdom. That's the record of a government investing in the economy to boost economic performance and to create jobs and wealth in this country. That's what my government's all about, and that's what we're delivering for people in Scotland.
Question number 2, Jackie Baillie.
Presiding officer, on Monday the SNP published yet another NHS recovery plan. That's 5 plans in just 4 years. Now, I know Biffa are suing the government, but this isn't the kind of recycling Scots are looking for. A pledge for a digital front door promised in 2021, not delivered. Fast-track cancer diagnostic centres in every health board promised in 2021, not delivered. And the height of the SNP's ambition is that patients will only wait a year for treatment. Do the SNP really think that's success? It's little surprise then that Colin Pullman, the director of RCN Scotland, said nursing staff reading this will be left scratching their heads, wondering just how the aspirations in this plan will be achieved in reality. Is it not the case that this SNP government is now just desperately scrambling around because they know, as everybody else in Scotland does, that they've broken Scotland's NHS?
First Minister.
No, I don't agree with that. I accept there are challenges in the National Health Service. I'm very candid about that. And I set out in my speech at the Robotarium in January exactly how the Scottish Government is going about doing that. Now, let me give Jackie Baillie some reassurance about the progress that we're making. In April 2024, the Scottish Government provided additional funding to NHS boards to deliver 64,000 additional procedures by March of 2025. By the end of January, 75,500 additional procedures had been delivered. We promised 64,000 over a whole year. Within 10 months, we delivered 75,500. In addition to that, in all 4 key radiology diagnostic tests have shown a decrease, with a 4% decrease in the total waiting list size for diagnostic tests. So I accept there are challenges, but the Scottish Government is focused on delivering progress for the people of Scotland, and that's what we're delivering now.
Jackie Baillie.
Presiding officer, the First Minister talks as if this is year 0. It isn't, because after 18 years in charge of our NHS, there's no one else left to blame. Let's take the crisis in primary care as an example. Back in 2018, the SNP unveiled a big new plan with the usual fanfare. They promised to deliver 800 more GPs. The result? Today there are fewer whole-time equivalent GPs, while demand has soared. In fact, since 2013, the number of whole-time equivalent GPs has fallen by more than 200, while funding has been cut by the SNP time and time again. It's the SNP's constant cycle of failure. Create a problem, announce a plan, things get worse, so rinse and repeat. Dr Ian Morrison, chair of BMA Scotland GP Committee, told the BBC that general practice is at crisis point. Is he wrong?
First Minister.
I accept that, as I've said throughout all of my answers about the health service since I became First Minister, there are challenges, because what Jackie Baillie ignores is the impact on population health as a consequence of our global pandemic that's had a colossal impact, not just on the health service here in Scotland, but across the United Kingdom and in every affected country in the world. So I recognise the challenges in the NHS. And on the question of GPs, we have seen an increase in the number of GPs in total headcount by 307 since 2017, and we already have in Scotland 82 GPs per 100,000 of population in Scotland, compared to 64 in England, 67 in Wales and 75 in Northern Ireland. So we've invested in general practice to make sure general practice is strong to meet the needs of the current period. We've also invested in broadening the staff base within general practice, and also by the recruitment through health boards to make sure that allied health professionals are able to contribute to meeting the demand as a result of the COVID pandemic that is now presenting itself in the National Health Service. So let me assure Jackie Baillie that the Government is absolutely focused on delivering improvements in the National Health Service. We're beginning to see the fruits of that plan that's resulting in more procedures, more activity, more engagement in the National Health Service, and there'll be more of that to come in the period ahead, because the Government's put a record sum of money in to support the National Health Service.
Jackie Baillie. Presiding Officer, once we see again the SNP spin machine wanting to pretend that everything is fine. But John Sweeney cannot escape his record, because after a global pandemic, he was the one who cut hundreds of millions of pounds from Scotland's GPs, from social care and from mental health budgets. And what's the result? Cancer targets missed, waiting lists out of control, deadly diagnosis delayed, thousands forced to go private. But don't worry, the fifth NHS recovery plan in 4 years will definitely sort it all out. And when it doesn't, there is still time to fit in a few more before the election. NHS nurses, doctors and ambulance workers are not fooled. 800,000 Scots stuck in pain on an NHS waiting list are not fooled. They deserve more than the SNP's hollow apologies and half-baked plans that never get delivered. Isn't it the case that after 18 years in charge, if the SNP had a plan to fix the NHS, they would have done it by now?
First Minister.
Well, that is just what we hear from Jackie Baillie every single week, and it ignores the facts of what are actually going on. So it's important. Well, Jackie Baillie's raised some really important issues about cancer care, and I want to
hear one another.
And I want to reassure members of the public, because it's not good enough for Jackie Baillie to create the alarm that she is creating with those questions. So let's take the 31-day standard. 94.7% of patients, 94.7% were treated within 31 days of a decision to treat, and the median wait is 4 days. Now that is demonstration of the achievements of the National Health Service. And most importantly, we are treating more patients with cancer on time within both the 31 and the 62-day standard compared to the same quarter 5 years ago. 4.5% more within the 31-day, 1.6% more than the 62-day standard. Jackie Baillie mentioned mental health services, child and adult mental health services. For the first time, we are now meeting the 18-week standard, which is an important commitment to support the mental health of children and young people in our society. So yes, there are challenges, but this government is absolutely focused on delivering on the National Health Service. That's why we put the record funding in place, and that's why Jackie Baillie couldn't find it within herself to back the government's budget. She's not interested in investing in the National Health Service. It's just politics, politics, politics for Jackie Baillie.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
On Monday this week, the Scottish Government withdrew critical protection against rent rises. For the first time in years, landlords will now have the power to instantly set rents back to uncontrolled free market levels. Tenants won't be able to stop it and won't be able to afford it. Let's be clear about the scale of the SNP's rent hikes. Data from Generation Rent and Living Rent showed that even when protections were in place, some landlords still tried to break the rules. In Glasgow, one landlord tried to double the rent from £700 to £1,400. But until this week, thanks to the temporary rent protections that I was proud to introduce, people like that could be stopped. That unbelievable increase was capped by the regulator at £784 instead of £1,400. So does the First Minister now understand why tenants across Scotland are so fearful about what he has done?
First Minister.
President Officer, before I answer the substance of Patrick Harvey's question, I wonder if you would allow me to just express to Patrick Harvey my good wishes on his decision to step down from the leadership of his co-leadership of the Scottish Green Party. And I've always enjoyed our encounters. We will have many more of them before the summer, and I wish him well for the future. On the substance of the question that he has raised, there are 2 points that I would make. First of all, there is, in a sense, part of the answer I would give is in the evidence that Mr Harvey put to Parliament a moment ago, that there are opportunities for tenants to seek a review of a rent increase which they believe to be unacceptable. And that has been exercised in one of the examples that Mr Harvey put to me, and exercised with success. But the second point I would put is the importance that the Government attaches to the principle of the point that Mr Harvey has made to me, which is why we're bringing forward a housing bill, and it's why we're introducing the concept of rent controls. And Parliament is currently considering at stage 2 the housing bill that will make provision for these issues as we move forward.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, I'm very grateful for the kind personal remarks from the First Minister, but I fear his comments on this policy issue are complacent. He talks about the protections that I just described. The point is those protections ended this week. They're no longer there protecting people. And it's a similar complacency to what we heard from the Minister for Housing. When he was some of these figures put to him, all he could say was that he was asking landlords to be sensible with these new, utterly uncontrolled powers. In truth, there is nothing now holding back a tide of unaffordable rent rises. And the Scottish Government hasn't even published an assessment of the number of people who are going to lose their homes as a result. The protection the Greens introduced succeeded in preventing eye-watering rent increases. Rents are already too high in Scotland.
Question, please, Mr Harvey.
And with energy bills going up and social security under attack, people need a government here that will be on their side. So will the First Minister think again? Stop watering down the new housing bill and make sure that it can cut rents instead of locking in ever more rent rises for the future.
First Minister.
Well, the public can be assured that they've got a government that's on their side. That's the government I lead, and that's why we're bringing forward the housing bill, which contains the important protections that I've set out. But it is important that we recognise there are strict legal processes that ensure that private landlords and their agents must follow very strict rules about ending any tenancy. So the point that Mr Harvey makes about evictions is not one that is without protections under the current legislative arrangements. There are also the measures in place that enable tenants to seek a review of a rent increase. And I can assure Mr Harvey that the Government is absolutely committed to the terms of the Housing Scotland Bill that is before Parliament today. We will scrutinise that to its completion and make sure that we implement the protections that Mr Harvey is seeking. That's the process that Parliament is going through just now, and the Government will see it through to its conclusion.
Question number 4, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reported comments made by the Chair of the North Sea Transition Task Force that the North Sea's future should be a national mission.
First Minister.
President Officer, the North Sea is vital to Scotland's energy transition. However, decisions on offshore oil and gas licensing, consenting and the fiscal regime are all currently reserved to the United Kingdom Government. We have consistently called for the UK Government to approach these decisions on a rigorously evidence-led, case-by-case basis, with climate compatibility and energy security as key considerations. We are clear in our support for a just transition for Scotland's oil and gas sector, which recognises the maturity of the North Sea Basin and is in line with our climate change commitments.
Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister... Well, the report recommends, first of all, that, among other things, a long-term, large-scale investment in low-carbon technology and ensuring that the continued and planned oil and gas extraction is in line with net-zero commitments. Does the First Minister share my view that, while they remain in charge of energy policy, the Labour Government must resource the transition appropriately to maintain and secure secure jobs, and that they must map out credible energy security transition and net zero strategies in order to get this right for the future. Or ideally, the national mission could and should be undertaken by an independent Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, Mr Stewart and I share the aspiration that an independent Scotland should be able to take forward the issues and challenges that face Scotland across all policy areas. That's what independence is all about. The most constructive thing I think that can be done, the most immediate thing that can be done, is the United Kingdom Government can give an early and, well, actually an immediate commitment to the Acorn carbon capture and storage project. That would transform the economic prospects of the north east of Scotland, and it would enable us to take forward the just transition. Now, Mr Stewart will know my frustration at the lack of progress being made with the United Kingdom Government, successive United Kingdom governments, about the Acorn carbon capture project, but that could enhance the opportunities for Scotland and deliver the future of the oil and gas sector and our net zero transition. And I just wish the UK Government would get on and take a positive decision about Acorn.
Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, the Transition Task Force also said that whilst we are transitioning towards renewables, it makes absolute sense to take what you can from the North Sea. So does the First Minister recognise the vital role that oil and gas will play in the transition, and will his party abandon its presumption against new oil and gas and ditch its hostility to the sector, which supports over 80,000 jobs in the North East?
First Minister.
Well, this government has no hostility to the oil and gas sector. Well, I'll say it again, just to reassure the Conservatives that they heard it the first time. There is no hostility.
Let's hear the First Minister.
There is no hostility in this government to oil and gas. What we are committed to is a rational transition to net zero, which enables us to fulfil our climate objectives. We will have to rely on elements of oil and gas for some time to come. And that will be part of the approach that the Scottish Government takes. But we also have to fulfil our climate objectives. Now, I know that there's been another change of position in the Conservative Party. Russell Finlay a few weeks ago said it was refreshingly honest of Kemi Badenoch to say that we should abandon our climate change targets. Now, what does that say about the Conservatives? It says the Conservatives are prepared in this Parliament to vote for climate change targets, and then when it becomes opportune to cuddle up to Nigel Farage and reform, they abandon the climate change targets. We all now know, because they're now deserting the Tory party is in a dance with Farage. Well, I'm going to leave them to all of that.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the developers of both the Rosebank and Jackdaw oil and gas fields have obtained their necessary exploration and other licences. They've complied fully with all government regulations. And on the strength of that, Presiding Officer, between them they have invested well over £1,000 million thus far. If they are now declined final permission because the rules have changed and the goalposts have been moved, surely the UK Government will almost certainly be pursued for legal claims by these companies for recovery of these sunk costs and possibly also loss of profits extending to several billion pounds or more, and consequential reduction in the Scottish budget of hundreds of million pounds. Will the First Minister, who is not hostile to the sector, now confirm Rosebank and Jackdaw must now go ahead?
First Minister.
President, as Mr Ewing knows, I am a very strong believer in the rule of law. And the issues there are.
Let's hear one another.
Well, I'm going to say that again, because that is part of my entire being. Is my belief in the rule of law. I know the Conservatives are cavalier about the rule of law, but I'm not cavalier about the rule of law, not one bit of it. Now, some of the issues that Mr Ewing raises in his question are of course influenced by court judgments that have been made. The Scottish and United Kingdom governments will have to consider the implications of those court decisions, and Mr Ewing, as an experienced parliamentarian and lawyer, will understand the importance of considering those particular rulings as we make judgments, and of course there could be implications of those judgments. But I assure Mr Ewing that the Scottish Government will always take a considered approach to those rulings that we must bear in mind in any decisions that we take.
Question number 5, Stephen Kerr.
To ask the First Minister what engagement the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government regarding what assessment has been made of the potential impact of an extension of US tariffs on Scottish businesses that export to the US market.
First Minister.
President Officer, there can be no doubt that the tariffs announced by the United States will cause damage to the global United Kingdom and Scottish economies. Scottish Government officials and ministers have been making representations to the UK Government on this matter for some time. Yesterday, the Minister for Business, Richard Lockhead, spoke with Douglas Alexander, the UK Minister of State for Trade, and emphasised the need to ensure Scotland's interests are protected in their negotiations with the United States. Scottish Government agencies will work with businesses to help advise and support them through this difficult and uncertain period.
Stephen Kerr.
If I might take a slightly different tack in relation to this issue, there's no doubt that these new tariffs announced last night will hit some of Scotland's most valuable exports: Scotch whisky, salmon, pharmaceuticals and power-generating equipment among them. So will the First Minister use his visit to the United States this weekend to make the case for fair and reciprocal trade? And will he work closely with the United Kingdom Government to protect Scottish jobs and businesses? Because rather than retaliate, we need to stay calm, keep a level head and focus on reaching a deal that shields Scotland from the worst economic impacts.
First Minister.
President Officer, there's a lot in Mr Kerr's question with which I agree, because I am a believer in free and open trade. I am a believer in exporting and international business activity. It serves Scotland well, and indeed, if I think about organisations like the Scottish Council for Development Industry, that is now Prosper, led the debate for most of my life on the importance of exporting and broadening the export base of the Scottish economy. So there's a lot in what Mr Kerr said with which I agree. We do, however, have to recognise the severity of the economic impact that will come as a consequence of the tariffs, and of course there are different responses to that can be formulated. I do give him the assurance that there will be close dialogue with the United Kingdom Government on these questions. It was a subject, as I said, that Mr Lockhead was discussing yesterday. Before Lord Mandelson took up his role as His Majesty's Ambassador to the United States, he and I had a conversation about the important issues that mattered to Scotland in that role, and Lord Mandelson generously gave of his time to make sure he was aware of that before he took up his office. So we will leave no stone unturned in promoting and protecting Scottish business and in finding our way through these challenges, but we all have to be aware that there will be negative implications based on what we heard yesterday.
Number 6, Katie Clark.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on whether the reported increased annual costs of Scotland's prisons to over £77,000 per prisoner represents good value for public money.
First Minister.
The figure of £77,000 is wrong. It mistakenly includes capital spending in estimating the cost of a prisoner place in Scotland by taking total spend and dividing by population. The average cost of a prisoner place in 23-24 was £47,140. This information was released by the Scottish Prison Service in February.
I'm grateful to the First Minister for that response. As he knows, Scotland has the highest numbers of prisoners in Western Europe, and if we want to reduce prison costs, we have to reduce the numbers of people in custody and levels of offending. Some people have to be kept in custody, but as a country we spend comparatively little on community justice. Does the First Minister accept that we need to significantly shift resources to robust alternatives to custody, which the evidence suggests are more effective at reducing offending for many prisoners?
First Minister.
Fundamentally, I agree with the point made by Katie Clark. We do incarcerate a greater proportion of our population per head of population than in almost all other European countries. That results in a larger prison population, and Katie Clark and members will know from the transparent engagement of the Justice Secretary with Parliament that the size of the prison population is a significant challenge that we are managing. Now, Katie Clark made the point about the importance of investment in community justice, and I agree with her. That's why, over a 2-year period, there has been a £25 million increase in investment in community justice activity, and the Government will look for opportunities to ensure that we expand that capacity, because it is one way of ensuring we achieve better outcomes and avoid the situation of the record levels of incarceration that we experience.
Brief supplementary, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in November 2022, when flat cash funding was proposed for the Scottish Prison Service, Katie Clark said, and I quote, "The most basic functions of a criminal justice system and prison service are under threat because of cuts. A properly supported criminal justice system is fundamental to our democracy, but these dangerous and disastrous cuts threaten us with its very existence." Today, in her initial question, she complained that too much is being spent in our prison service. Does the First Minister agree that this kind of opportunistic nonsense simply discredits the Labour Party and that Scotland's prison service deserves much better?
Only on matters for which the First Minister is responsible.
President, what I would say is that the Government is working carefully to ensure that we have a sustainable prison estate. That involves ensuring that we have adequate capacity within the prison estate, but also that we take measures to shift the balance of criminal justice to where it is safe to do so, to enable individuals to have different approaches to remedy as a result of criminal justice cases than simply the option of incarceration.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The lack of a holistic strategy has led to the cost of our overcrowded prisons spiralling. In response, the Government dropped a proposal to let long-term prisoners out early, but didn't rule out doing it in future. Now, Victim Support Scotland, Rape Crisis Scotland and Scottish Women's Aid all say such a move would be a threat to victims and to the public. So will the First Minister put the public interest first and rule out the early release of long-term prisoners? Yes or no?
First Minister.
See, I think that question, in a sense, sums up the problem we've got here. Mr. Kerr. Well, I don't know. Why
let's hear one another.
You know, apparently, the Conservatives believe in free speech, unless it's me that's speaking. It's just, you know, it's just really. Liam Kerr has said there's a lack of a holistic strategy. And then Liam Kerr has said there's a lack of a holistic strategy. And then he has gone on to suggest one of the options that could be considered in that holistic strategy, and I dispute his claim. I think we have got a holistic strategy. The Justice Secretary has been completely open with this Parliament about all of the challenges that we face and has handled these challenges superbly well, in my opinion. Now, Liam Kerr then asks me for a holistic strategy and rules out one of the possibilities within that. I think if the Conservatives want to be treated seriously, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to treat them seriously by the way in which they go about exercising their politics, as one of their members has found out today and has publicly made clear is the case, the Conservatives should engage constructively in a debate about how we meet the real challenges that this Government is focused on addressing.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. As ever, I'm very keen to enable as many members as possible to take part. Concise questions and answers appreciated. And I call Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Dumfries and Galloway Council, Transport Scotland and partners regarding the closure of Kirkcudbright Bridge, which is causing massive disruption for everyone in the town, impacting lifeline services as well as the impact ahead of the very busy tourist season, and what practical support can be offered to enable repairs, reopening and even replacement of the bridge.
First Minister.
Government officials have been in dialogue with the Dumfries and Galloway Council about this issue. It's part of the local authority infrastructure. The local authority has the obligation to bring forward plans to ensure that the bridge, which I understand disrupts connections between communities within Kirkcudbright, are properly addressed. Public safety, of course, is an issue that cannot be ignored by the local authority, but if there is any advisory support the government can make available, I would be happy to arrange such discussions with the local authority.
Thank you. Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The only way ministers have been able to meet their CAMS waiting times target has been removing young people and children waiting in ADHD and an autism diagnosis. That is a fact. It is shameful. But I have been contacted by many parents here in Edinburgh who have now been forced to go private to seek a diagnosis. The follow-up meetings, the GP practice have told them they will now not accept the continuing care of these individuals or deliver the prescriptions these children need. Can I ask the First Minister, will he review this policy and will specifically distribute national guidance on prescribing for these young people?
First Minister.
I addressed some of these points in my answer to Murdo Fraser last week, where I made clear that there was an approach being taken, which in Tayside I thought had been ill communicated, which was to seek to provide earlier intervention to support young people who presented with mental health challenges. Now, I think that is the right way to proceed. I think that early intervention of support that can meet the needs of young people is the way that we should move forward. But it has to be properly planned and delivered and communicated in all localities. Now, on the question of prescribing, I am not going to stand here and dictate what the prescribing policy would be. That would be ridiculous for me to set that out as First Minister. Clinical judgments are there to be made by clinicians who are trained to undertake that expert analysis, and I trust them to take that forward.
Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is aware of the announcement yesterday that Carse medical practice will close in September, which will leave 3,600 people without a local practice. Unless a solution is found, patients will face significant travel to alternative practices in Dundee or Perth, and there are no direct buses. For years, they have been operating in an inappropriate temporary surgery with an insecure and uncertain future. This situation is totally unacceptable. Can I ask the First Minister what he thinks the solution is?
First Minister.
So obviously, this is an issue that affects my own constituency, President Officer, so I should be transparent about that point. I'm very closely connected with the issues and concerns of my constituents on this matter. NHS Tayside has the responsibility for working with the local community and with the general practitioners about the provision of facilities, physical facilities, to meet the needs of the local population. And certainly in my local capacity as the Member of Parliament, I'm engaging in those discussions. And it certainly is, to me, unacceptable that patients in the Earl area and surrounding villages in the Carsagowrie would have to travel as extensive distances as Claire Baker has set out. And I will work with NHS Tayside to address and to find a solution to that particular challenge.
Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, the UK austerity agenda places a significant budgetary pressure on Scotland as we try to protect the most vulnerable here, increasingly targeted by the Labour Party. Given the devolved impact, will the First Minister therefore urge Keir Starmer to act on a new study published by the London School of Economics saying that if the UK Government followed Scotland's policies, it would lift 700,000 children out of poverty? And how could Scotland reinvest that money, not having to pick up the failures of the UK Government to benefit my constituents in Maidhill and Springburn and beyond?
First Minister.
Mr Doris raises an issue that matters enormously to me, because he will know, as Parliament knows, the focal point of my government's agenda is the eradication of child poverty. And in the study that Mr Doris has cited from the London School of Economics, Professor Ruth Patrick has said The progress Scotland has made on driving poverty rates down shows another way is possible, and we certainly need another way compared to this United Kingdom Government, which has voluntarily set out welfare reforms that will push 50,000 children into poverty based on the analysis of a Labour government. What on earth is the point of a Labour government that is forcing more and more children into poverty? We are taking better decisions in Scotland, where child poverty rates are falling when they are rising in every other part of the United Kingdom, and it demonstrates the Labour government in Westminster is not delivering for the people of Scotland.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Between 2015 and 2023, banks on Scottish high streets have declined by 60%. Access to cash is like searching for water in a desert in rural towns. Will the First Minister back my calls for the establishment of more shared banking hubs in towns like Eyemouth and Selkirk, so that residents and businesses don't feel so far removed from essential services?
First Minister. I think there's a lot of merit in the concept of shared banking facilities, and I have been exploring that very possibility in the Highland Perthshire area of my constituency as well, so I understand the difficulties that Rachel Hamilton cites. I would encourage banks to work together on this proposition. There are a number of examples in Scotland where banks have come together. And I think this is a way of trying to broaden access to cash in rural areas, and I can understand the viability challenges that individual banks alone find in a particular town. But on a collaborative basis, there are solutions to be sought. So I do encourage different banks to engage constructively on these questions in local areas.
Michael Mara.
On 19th of March, the management of the University of Dundee and the leaders of the Scottish Funding Council committed to Parliament to provide a new recovery plan for the University of Dundee within 2 weeks. That deadline passed yesterday, First Minister. There is no new plan. This could not be more urgent. Every day that passes without a plan further imperils the most important institution in my city. There is a complete absence of leadership. When will a voluntary severance scheme open, and when will we see a new plan?
First Minister.
Let me assure Mr Mara there is no absence of leadership on this question, because it is commanding a huge amount of time and attention and focus within government. It was discussed extensively at the Cabinet on Tuesday. The Deputy First Minister is leading cross-government work, working closely with the Education Secretary, who has portfolio responsibilities for universities, the Health Secretary, because of the extraordinary significance of life sciences within the University of Dundee, and the Justice Secretary in relation to the role of, for example, the Leverhulme Institute, which is fundamental to the University of Dundee. I have made it absolutely clear that the original financial recovery plan is completely unacceptable, and there has to be an alternative. That work is underway. There was discussions this morning which have narrowed down some of the options that are being taken forward, and the Government will consider further proposals. But I want to assure Mr Mara that there is a real focus on ensuring we chart a pathway forward here. But it's also important that I make clear that there is a secure future for the University of Dundee. I want students to accept their offers from the University of Dundee confident in the future of the university. I want researchers to be confident that they can continue their involvement in the University of Dundee, because this Government is determined to secure that future for the university. It will take us time. We've put the financial liquidity support in place, as requested by the University of Dundee, to make sure they are secure in what they do in the period ahead. But the design of an alternative recovery plan is an absolute prerequisite for the next steps that we must take, and the Government is determined to take them.
Briefly, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. As the First Minister knows, in farming communities across Scotland this is lambing season, but he'll also be aware that we're seeing an alarming rise in attacks by ravens on lambs and ewes, leading to shocking, often fatal injuries. In Orkney, I've heard from distressed farmers who've lost stock in horrendous circumstances, and from vets who talk about serious animal welfare concerns. It's clear the raven population has increased significantly in recent years, so does the First Minister agree that a survey of raven numbers is now urgently required, and will he ask Nature Scot not just to carry out that survey, but also provide whatever support farmers need through licensing to deal with attacks, ideally before they occur?
First Minister.
I acknowledge the significance of the point that Mr MacArthur raises, and indeed when I recently visited Orkney I had this issue raised with me by farming representatives on the visit. There is of course the opportunity for there to be licences issued by Nature Scot to tackle the issue that Mr MacArthur puts forward, and obviously if there are farmers locally that wish to take that up, that can be encouraged. I certainly will encourage Nature Scot to engage with the farming community in Orkney and I know in other communities to address the issue. As to the specifics of whether a population survey is the best way forward, I'm not certain that's the answer, but I certainly will explore that for Mr MacArthur and will write to him with the response from Nature Scot.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Could I have your attention, please? A fire has been reported in this area. Visitors in the public gallery, please follow the directions of security staff and evacuate to the public foyer immediately. People who require assistance to evacuate.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.